was quite an introduction. Thank you, Marcia. Esteemed members of the Universal House of Justice and beloved friends, good evening. These last months, we have heard talks about 2 of the 3 spiritual prerequisites of success. The beloved guardian had said in the Advent of Divine Justice that these were the weapons which the American believers needed to wield in their double crusade of first regenerating the inward life of their own community, and of secondly, assailing the long-standing evils that had entrenched themselves in the life of their nation. Mr. Glenford Mitchell addressed us on the subject of rectitude of conduct, and Mr. Hartmut Grossman spoke to us about a chaste and holy life. This evening we will consider together the subject of the 3rd and last of these spiritual prerequisites, freedom from prejudice. In so doing, we will address the following questions. 1, what is prejudice? And how does it relate to other key concepts such as the oneness of mankind? And 2, what can we, who have just embarked on the next in a series of global plans, do to free ourselves from prejudice? In considering this first issue, there are a number of questions to ponder. What does freedom from prejudice mean? Prejudice can be defined as a preconceived opinion, but one that is not based on reason or actual experience. Or could we say that prejudice is an attachment to an untruth? Or could we say that in some cases it is an emotional attachment to an untruth? There are different degrees or levels to prejudice. For example, we can say, Persian refugees are like this and that. Haredi Jews are like this and this. Turks living in Western Iran are such and such. There's an entire assortment of stories and even jokes about this or that race, ethnic group, or nationality, and how they are. In essence, in engaging in this kind of talk, we are prejudging, basing our ideas on impressions, often without factual basis. Things become a little more complicated, however, when what we think actually has some element of truth to it, some statistical basis. For example, a lot of Americans are overweight. Women seem to talk more than men. There are more Arabs than Jews in the prisons here, more blacks than whites in U.S. prisons. However, if we let those ideas influence our attitude to individuals who belong to these groups, isn't it prejudicial? Are we not going from the general to the particular in an unjustified manner? Is there yet another level to these ideas about prejudice? If we hold a belief that has a factual basis about a category of people, but the belief itself is divisive or dismissive and potentially negative, what do we as Baha'is do? For example, these people are so wealthy and materialistic that it will be very hard to teach them. These people are so poor and affected by civil war that it will be almost impossible for them to get beyond their ethnic hatreds, and for sure, they will have difficulty handling money. These people are so uneducated that they will never be able to read these texts. These people are so overeducated, busy running after money, and have such a stressful lifestyle that they don't have time to listen to us. What shall we do? ignore these attitudes, adjust them, analyze and work with them? How does our view of the oneness of mankind affect our desire to be free from prejudice? The beloved guardian tells us, of the principles enshrined in these tablets, the most vital of them all is the principle of the oneness and wholeness of the human race, which may well be regarded as the hallmark of Baha'u'llah's revelation and the pivot of his teachings. Of such cardinal importance is this principle of unity that it is expressly referred to in the Book of his covenant, and he unreservedly proclaims it as the central purpose of his faith. End quote. Doesn't our belief in the oneness of mankind encourage us to avoid being judgmental or dismissive, or to examine carefully whatever facts our opinions are based on, to make the best of situations? Do we not concentrate on the good qualities and do our best to ignore the bad? If we have a welcoming attitude towards diversity, wouldn't we look at differences as a positive factor, even if some of them seemed a little strange or at first displeasing to us? Would we not give people the benefit of the doubt? Prejudice is complicated, subtle, and challenging, and it remains at the heart of the world's problems. In its letter to the peoples of the world of October 1985, the Universal House of Justice stated, "World order can be founded only on an unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind, a spiritual truth which all the human sciences confirm. Recognition of this truth requires abandonment of prejudice of every kind, race, class, color, creed, nation, sex, degree of material civilization, everything which enables people to consider themselves superior to others. Acceptance of the oneness of mankind is the first fundamental prerequisite for the reorganization and administration of the world as one country, the home of mankind. Universal acceptance of this spiritual principle is essential to any successful attempt to establish world peace." This is our basis. Let us consider a few words from one of Abdu'l-Baha's first talks in Paris. When a man turns his face to God, he finds sunshine everywhere. All men are his brothers. Let not conventionality cause you to seem cold and unsympathetic when you meet strange people from other countries. Do not look at them as though you suspected them of being evildoers, thieves, and boors. You think it necessary to be very careful not to expose yourself to the risk of making acquaintance with such possibly undesirable people. I ask you not to think only of yourselves. Be kind to the strangers, whether they come from Turkey, Japan, Persia, Russia, China, or any other country in the world. Help to make them feel at home. Find out where they are staying. Ask if you may render them any service. Try to make their lives a little happier. In this way, even if sometimes what you at first suspected should be true, still go out of your way to be kind to them. This kindness will help them to become better. The Master then concludes, what profit is there in agreeing that universal friendship is good and talking of the solidarity of the human race as a grand ideal? Unless these thoughts are translated into the world of action, they are useless. And there we have the broader guidance for Baha'is quite clearly stated. Even if there is a basis for our negative view, We should go out of our way to be kind, and that kindness will help them, the individuals in question, to become better. Abdu'l-Baha also refers to prejudice as an illusion, a superstition pure and simple. The lovers of mankind, he says, these are the superior men, of whatever nation, creed, or color they may be. As we know, there are many kinds of prejudice. We're extremely fortunate as Baha'is in that in some instances our writings not only help us to understand the nature of prejudice, but also provide a recipe for a particularly entrenched problem. A case in point is racial prejudice. In 1938, the beloved Guardian wrote to the American believers and explained that this issue was the most vital and challenging issue confronting the Baha'i community at the present stage of its evolution. He asked them to call to mind the example and conduct of Abdu'l-Baha, to remember his courage, his genuine love, his informal and indiscriminating fellowship. Do you remember the story illustrating Abdu'l-Baha's keen sense of justice when he was overcharged by the carriage driver? The stories illustrating his spontaneous sympathy for the downtrodden when he visited the Bowery in New York City, or removed his trousers to offer them to a poor man, or when he gently but firmly educated Lua Getzinger about the visiting of the poor of Akka. The story is about his ever-abiding sense of the oneness of the human race when he held up the rich chocolate candy next to the face of the young African-American boy. When he insisted that his friend Mr. Gregory, an African-American lawyer and later hand of the cause of God, be included and given the place of honor at a VIP dinner. I remember discovering as a newly declared young Baha'i in the 1960s, when the cities in America were literally burning around us because of race riots, that to my surprise, my new faith even gave specific, concrete advice on the subject of freeing oneself from racial prejudice, laid out in stunning prose by the beloved Guardian. Let the white make a supreme effort to abandon once for all their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority, to correct their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude towards the members of the other race, to persuade them through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions, and to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who have received for so long a period such grievous and slow healing wounds. Let the Negroes show by every means in their power the warmth of their response, their readiness to forget the past, and their ability to wipe out every trace of suspicion that may still linger in their hearts and minds. Let neither think that the solution of so vast a problem is a matter that exclusively concerns the other. Let neither think that such a problem can either easily or immediately be resolved. Let neither think that they can wait confidently for the solution of this problem until the initiative has been taken by agencies that stand outside their faith. Let neither think that anything short of genuine love, extreme patience, true humility, consummate tact, sound initiative, mature wisdom, and deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort can succeed in blotting out the stain which this patent evil has left on the fair name of their common country. Let them rather believe and be firmly convinced that on their mutual understanding, their amity and sustained cooperation must depend the materialization of the hopes he, Abdu'l-Baha, cherished for their joint contribution to the fulfillment of that country's glorious destiny. Friends, to find that your own religion contains such guidance was really amazing to me when I was a new Baha'i. How many youth conferences at that time were devoted to the study of these words, as we all, white and black, tried to understand how to apply them in our lives. Turning to tribal prejudice, the House of Justice was writing to the National Assemblies of Africa as far back as 1970, warning them that as tribal tensions were increasing on the continent, the Friends needed to be vigilant, lest any trace of prejudice or hatred enter their midst. Here is guidance of a different form, as the House of Justice drew attention to the problem and advised the assemblies on general strategies that would help their communities to overcome tribal prejudice. They were told that they should endeavor to bring into the faith an ever larger representation of the various tribes in each country, should demonstrate to their countrymen what the Word of God could do, should provide a shining example for the scrutiny of the leaders and rulers of their countries, of a unified community working together in full concord and harmony, should demonstrate a hope that is attainable and a pattern worthy to be emulated. As a result, in Africa today, we have many examples of communities where Baha'is from various tribal groups are striving to set this shining example. For instance, in Rwanda, where the Hutus and Tutsis are serving together, or in Liberia, where Mr. Hall and I recently visited and participated in workshops, where the Friends from the opposing ethnic groups who have been at war with one another off and on since 1989 were working together in the same institutional conference. Such concrete guidance for our world community. I remember when our National Spiritual Assembly of the Central African Republic was told back in the 1970s that local spiritual assemblies should be elected in the different regions of the country, not just in a few areas. What a challenge. How to even get to some of those areas with only 150 kilometers of paved road at that time. And we were to even try and reach the pygmies to achieve an ever larger representation. For one of the Central African Friends serving on that National Assembly, this was a surprise. He said at the time that a lot of the pygmies in his region had been his grandfather's slaves. We were all learning. And yet, because of this guidance, when the national conventions were held 50 kilometers outside of the capital, the delegates would come in from the north, from the south, the east, and the west of the country for their deliberations. I recall one year in the evening we built a big fire, and the delegates taught each other dances from different regions of the country. For one of the dances, you had to grab a piece of a bush and tuck it into the back of your skirt or pants. Our children were there. We were under the stars and the moon, and we all danced together. I couldn't think what to teach, so I shared the London Bridges song game where you line up and join hands and pass under the bridge. I learned that not only the languages and dances of the tribes were different, but I was told that even the rhythms and musical styles were different depending on the different areas of the country. What's the point of my mentioning all of this? It is to underline the foresight of the House of Justice, instructing us 30 years ago at times when the tribal groups didn't mix much in that country, to be inclusive, to get to know one another, to establish dialogue, all of which was to lead to a greater unity in diversity and gradually to a broader representation on the institutions. In later years, it became a huge protection for the Baha'i community when the stresses and strains of tribal tensions beset the government. How fortunate we are. We receive guidance, and we are told that if we work on our own transformation, our actions can serve as an example to others and become as a beacon of hope for a deeply troubled world. In a similar vein, but more recently, several letters have been sent from the House of Justice to national assemblies in Europe about ethnic prejudices, encouraging them in their efforts to bring minority populations into the cause and to integrate them effectively into their communities. In August 1995, to a national assembly in Europe that was having a great influx of Persian refugees. No doubt as your numbers increase, you will, by being to your fellow countrymen a sterling example of true fellowship and diversity, draw an increasing number of souls to your ranks. More recently, in July 2003, to another national assembly in Europe, economic realities in Europe itself, combined with the economic and social pressures that are producing a flood of immigrants, particularly from Muslim countries, are changing fundamentally the ethnic and cultural character of Europe. Clearly, the process will continue and very likely gather momentum, bringing in its wake a great many severe social stresses. The letter continues. For the Baha'i communities in these countries, this situation creates unprecedented opportunities to provide spiritual and social leadership. To the extent that you can present to your fellow citizens the example of communities in which people of diverse background are truly united, your work will represent a beacon of hope, attracting larger numbers of native-born citizens as well as a greater diversity of immigrants. End quote. The bottom line here seems to be that to the degree to which we integrate successfully, even on a continent where it has not been so easy to teach in the past, this very act will help us to attract even the native-born citizens of these countries. What does the House of Justice tell us about gender prejudice? There is so much material. It warns us, for example, that the denial of such equality between men and women perpetrates an injustice against 1/2 of the world's population, and promotes in men harmful attitudes and habits that are carried from the family to the workplace to political life and ultimately to international relations. Such an enlightening perspective, the principle of a chain reaction. How then do we improve our attitudes and habits in relation to the equality of men and women that are present in our own homes, in our families, in our marriages? And further, only as women are welcomed into partnership, says the House of Justice, in all fields of human endeavor, will the moral and psychological climate be created in which international peace can emerge. Thus, a direct link between what transpires in our homes and achieving international peace. Educational prejudice is another pitfall. And yet, was it not an illiterate blacksmith who engaged in conversation, Abul Fazl, a scholar of great eminence, and confounded him with his simple logic? We should not let ourselves be swayed or overly impressed by educational degrees or let them blind us to the keen intelligence and gifts of many relatively unschooled individuals and groups. Finally, what guidance might we have concerning religious prejudice? At the turn of the century, Abdu'l-Baha was explaining that the principal reason for unrest among nations, the chief cause, was the misrepresentation of religion by the religious leaders and teachers. In Paris Talks, he said, they teach their followers to believe that their own form of religion is the only one pleasing to God. and that followers of any other persuasion are condemned by the all-loving Father. Decades later, the Universal House of Justice, in its message of 2002 to the world's religious leaders, explained that prejudices that once seemed inherent in the nature of the human species are everywhere giving way. Barriers of cultural, ethnic, or national origin. And yet, tragically, religious prejudice continues. The message then states, with every day that passes, danger grows, and the rising fires of religious prejudice will ignite a worldwide conflagration, the consequences of which are unthinkable. The crisis calls on religious leadership for a break with the past, as decisive as those that opened the way for society to address equally corrosive prejudices of race, gender, and nation. At this greatest turning point in the history of civilization, the demands of such service could not be more clear. The well-being of mankind, its peace and security, are unattainable, Baha'u'llah urges, unless and until its unity is firmly established. The list of prejudices goes on. Political prejudice, generational prejudice, nationalistic prejudice, and so forth. Alas, the human intellect is endlessly creative in finding pretexts to fear, hate, or dismiss fellow beings. Going to part 2. What can we, who have just embarked on the next in a series of global plans, do to free ourselves from prejudice? In the context of our lives today, in the current 5-year plan, how shall we proceed? Can we say, as of today, I'm going to rid myself of my bad habits? It may not be so simple. We may, more likely, need to make a commitment to develop new habits and have a good framework within which to do so. If actions took the place of words, said Abdu'l-Baha, the world's misery would very soon be changed into comfort. So we need to act. In its recent 27 December 2005, the House of Justice clearly outlines our framework for action for the coming 5 years. As we serve within this framework, we can strive to free ourselves from various forms of prejudice. Let us look first at the core activities of the plan, some of the elements that form this framework for action. Study circles. They offer an opportunity to sit down with a diverse group of people and study together, to walk a path of spiritual development and service. During this study, there's usually an element of bonding that takes place. The level of discourse is raised. We're no longer talking about the weather, one's pets, the movies, the mondial. Well, I may have to make an exception there. I'm not prejudiced, but I did hear that Ghana won. And I've been waiting for Africa to win something. The participants are exchanging deeper ideas involving spiritual principles about life and death, the soul, transformation. We're developing skills, acquiring spiritual insights, deepening our knowledge of the faith. We may well find ourselves coming closer to others who are quite different than we. Now, we're not just talking about oneness, we're learning to be one. We're learning through action, growing together, each one's development enhanced by the other's contributions. What about being a tutor? If you're lucky enough to be a tutor, you can accompany the participants in their study and in their initial attempts to perform acts of service until they too are ready to start their own study circles and help others to do the same. As a tutor, in addition to coming closer to people who are different from you, You're also chipping away at another prejudice we referred to earlier, that of attitudes related and connected to education. The I know a lot and you know little attitude that creeps into so much of our educational experience. Here, as the tutor accompanies the other participants, they discover together. 2 young people I know were telling me about a study circle that they were part of in Australia. There were several Baha'is, the well-educated young couple in question, and some older Persian believers, and 2 non-Baha'is, a taxi cab driver and a hairdresser. They were saying, this young couple, how they found the remarks of the taxi cab driver and the hairdresser thought-provoking and challenging. And they were reminded of the need to avoid educational prejudices such as confusing education with intelligence. What about our children's classes? Can we work away at some of our prejudices by participating in this activity? You're familiar with this quotation. Regard man as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone cause it to reveal its treasures and enable mankind to benefit therefrom. Those of us who have studied Book 3 or deepened on the subject of education know that our own attitudes about how to work with children need to be examined. Do we see them as an empty vessel that we are going to fill? Or do we see them as a mine full of gems which it is our responsibility to work with, looking even into the crevices to discover the gems, the gifts and talents of these children that we have been promised are there? Do we constantly discipline them, shut them up, expect them to conform exactly to our way of thinking? Or do we know how to encourage them, offering praise with each breath, considering them as our spiritual children? What a difference with past attitudes and the manner in which so many of us were educated. Suppose we serve as animators of junior youth groups. If one participates in this activity on a continent such as Europe, where the initial focus of the program's implementation is directed towards minority populations, one would not only be involved in empowering junior youth, but one would have the additional experience of working with minority populations, of widening one's circle of contacts. In all 3 cases, as a tutor of study circles, a teacher of children's classes, or a junior youth animator, one becomes an integral part of a fledgling system of global education, involved at the cutting edge of a new approach to learning. These friends, the tutors, the teachers, and the animators, are like members of 3 armies, empowering and nurturing others. They facilitate learning. They share a joint discovery of insights rather than hoarding knowledge for themselves in a closed and authoritarian manner. They're moving away from top-down orientations. Although this already seems natural to us, in a number of ways, it is quite revolutionary and represents a paradigm shift of attitude and approach to current systems of education in many parts of the world. More and more devotional meetings are now being initiated. Gone is the day when there was just one prayer meeting at the Baha'i Center on Sunday morning. Nor is there just one way of holding a devotional meeting. There are now avenues for a greater diversity of cultural expression. Those who like singing can do so. Those who want more participation of children can arrange things that way. Those who want to include readings from other scriptures should arrange their programs accordingly. If the 5-year plan and its core activities provide a framework for working on our prejudices, our communities are where much of this action takes place. In some of our more advanced clusters, we're becoming familiar with each other's cultural expressions. frequenting each other's homes more through home visits and other activities. We're becoming closer. No one way of doing things prevails. There's less rigidity and more openness as we learn to appreciate diverse approaches to prayer and worship. Again, rather than talking about oneness, we're living it, learning as we go. We know we need to multiply the core activities, but what does this oblige us to do? In some cases, we wait until we run out of Baha'is to put into our activities, and then we find we have no choice but to reach out to others if we want to have the faith grow and keep the Institute process moving. We're obliged to develop a stronger outward-looking orientation to go out and find people, look for receptive populations, and in the process, we become less insular. We come out of our comfort zone, our closed circles of the past when we knew everybody at the 19-day feast. As we do, we work on our prejudices. Often, it is the marginalized populations which are more responsive. Are we welcoming? Do we receive them as equals or set up a lot of rules? Do we have preconceived notions about them? Emotional attachments to untruths where they are concerned? Or do we welcome the new diversity? As new people pour into our community of interest and the ranks of the faith start to swell, we need to be open to their cultures, preferences, and tastes. By their very nature, these activities and this flow of new people helps us to find ways to reshape our old habits and attitudes, to restructure our activities, revitalize our communities, and live in a manner that helps to free us from prejudice. In general, we need to welcome diversity and be proud of it. Embrace it, capitalize on it. It's exciting. We're experiencing a world shrinking into a neighborhood. It's a privilege to have such a diversity of friends. Not everyone can. As a community, we're a workshop, not a showcase. We learn to work things out as we go, committing ourselves to new habits, to change, to a greater flexibility. The House of Justice explains, as the spiritual foundations of the community are fortified in this way, the level of collective discourse is raised. Social relations among the friends take on new meaning, and a sense of common purpose inspires their interactions. God's major plan is assisting us. The House of Justice also states, as unrelenting social and political forces continue to uproot people from their homelands and sweep them across continents, an uncompromising appreciation for a diversity of backgrounds and for the strength it confers on the whole will prove crucial to the expansion and consolidation of the community. What about all these refugee populations shifting all over Africa? What about all of the immigrants in Europe, the United States, Australia? It is this mixing and shuffling of population that enhances the vitality of our communities. After all, who knows how to build a new world order? Has anyone done this before? We need to help each other out as we go. Do we make mistakes? But of course. Are we embarrassed by them? Do we sweep them under the rug and try and appear perfect? Or do we act, reflect, evaluate, adjust our course, and move on? As we strive to develop our diverse communities, we shouldn't become discouraged. We need to remember the guidance that can help us over the inevitable bumps and obstacles. Consider, for example, the following quotations that offer such solace and enhance our understanding. The Baha'is are far from perfect, as individuals or when they serve on elected bodies. But the system of Baha'u'llah is perfect, and gradually the believers will mature, and the system will work better. The friends must be patient with each other and must realize that the cause is still in its infancy, and its institutions are not yet functioning perfectly. The greater the patience, the loving understanding, and the forbearance the believers show towards each other and their shortcomings, the greater will be the progress of the whole Baha'i community at large. We gradually develop and increase our much-needed spiritual qualities of patience, detachment, compassion, and we gain in wisdom. We learn to be more encouraging, empowering, and supportive of one another. Maybe we start seeing the forest instead of the trees, and start perceiving ourselves as the privileged actors in the unfoldment of a divine drama. Another suggestion of how to gradually free our communities and institutions from prejudice is to constantly improve the way we educate our children. Those of you who are young couples, those of you who have young families, how fortunate you are. You have such a wealth of writings at your disposal, compilations, letters, entire books. When we were raising our children, it was hard to find guidance in English on the subject. We would comb through faded copies of items from some of the old Star of the West volumes, and finally, in 1976, a compilation on the education of children came out. As a parent, you can do a lot to break the cycle of passing prejudices of religion, race, tribe, class, gender, down from one generation to the next. For example, how do we inculcate into children of a young age the spirit of gender equality? Do we give chores to both boys and girls? Are there special foods for one or both? How do we handle decisions regarding their schooling, the funding of their schooling? Do we remember Abdu'l-Baha's counsel that if there is not enough money in the family to educate both the girl and the boy, the money must go to the girl's education, for she is the potential mother. If we're not careful as parents, we can end up spoiling our children or saddling them with subtle prejudices, preparing the way for a difficult life for the future spouse of our offspring. Parents are constantly challenged because of the tremendous need for improved character development of our children. This would naturally include helping them to grow up as free from prejudice as possible. Training in morals, says Abdu'l-Baha, and good conduct is far more important than book learning. The child who conducts himself well, even though he be ignorant, is of benefit to others, while an ill-natured, ill-behaved child is corrupted and harmful to others, even though he be learned. If, however, the child be trained to be both learned and good, the result is light upon light. Parents need to have the courage to be different, to seek out, cling to, and follow the guidance and standards in the writings, not necessarily to those of our relatives or cultures, and to strive for this concept of light upon light as we raise the next generation. A fourth suggestion of an arena in which to work on freeing ourselves from prejudice is travel teaching and pioneering. Another excellent environment for working on our prejudices, becoming more open, more flexible in our attitudes. You may find that when you get off the plane at your new post, another language is being spoken, the people look different, the climate is different, the culture isn't the same as yours, the food is really different, the manners are different, even the sense of humor may be different, and they may not even laugh at your jokes. More importantly, at a deeper level, people don't seem to think and reason the way you do. It turns out that their attitudes towards authority, towards age, government, individual rights, relations between men and women are all quite different from yours. Help. Where am I? What am I doing? Welcome to your new home, where things are quite different from where you came from, and you're a guest in the country. You have moved out of your comfort zone, and you may have some difficulty interpreting nuances and signals. But Baha'u'llah is with you. You are promised that if you arise to aid his cause, God will render you victorious over 10 times 10,000 souls. And should you wax in your love for the Blessed Beauty, you will triumph over all that is in heaven and all that is on earth. I always felt that pioneering was like being in a pressure cooker. First, the cover is screwed down, tighter and tighter, and then the heat is turned up. And then you start bouncing around inside. Accelerated growth and transformation, a crash course in spiritual development. When my husband and I were first elected to serve on the National Spiritual Assembly of the Central African Republic, it was composed of one British woman, one young man fresh from Iran who was a school teacher out in the provinces, one quite extraordinary young Italian who zoomed around on a Yamaha 500 motorcycle, we 2 Bostonians, and 4 Central Africans from different tribal groups. The Africans probably thought that all we white people would understand each other, but we were actually from 3 continents. And we probably thought that they would understand each other, but they were from different tribal groups. Yet as we sat there on our hard wooden chairs in our small Baha'i center in the city of Bangui, perspiring in the heat, we gradually began to work things out, trying to follow as closely as possible the guidance in the writings and the directives from the Universal House of Justice. I used to tell myself that those were the most important meetings going on in the country at that time. One pioneers to be of service, to empower others, to accompany others as a tutor, to contribute to raising the capacity of others. The old mode of paternalism, of colonialism, of educating the ignorant, of control is not what you want. And your prejudices get worked over quite regularly as you sit there and engage in your service. Mr. Naqshbandi once gave some advice to my husband and myself. He was asking us who we were training in our new country. Who were we training? Because you were the secretary and you were the treasurer, right? Yes, that's right. And who are you training? We weren't training anybody. I said, you're supposed to be training. He said, that's your purpose in being there. He said, you have to be like the wind in the sails, always propelling the boat forward, but invisible. You are there to train others, to pass responsibility onto the shoulders of the people of the country. Your goal is to become dispensable and not to remain indispensable. If we have trouble getting along with one another, pioneers with local friends, we can always remember the following, a quotation which helped me so often. Love the creatures for the sake of God and not for themselves. You will never become angry or impatient if you love them for the sake of God. Humanity is not perfect. There are imperfections in every human being, and you will always become unhappy if you look toward the people themselves. But if you look toward God, you will love them and be kind to them. For the world of God is the world of perfection and complete mercy. Finally, we have, of course, in our life here at the Baha'i World Center, many opportunities to work on our self-transformation and to make great efforts to free ourselves from prejudice. There's an unusual diversity of race, culture, and background here. 78 different nationalities in our World Center community. Where else will you find such an opportunity? Jump in. Take advantage of it. Cultivate cross-cultural friendships. In our daily service to the Universal House of Justice, in our evening and weekend activities, we can foster friendships, learn from others who are different from ourselves. Our time here is, however, limited. 12 months, 24 months, 30 months, it goes by so quickly. Let us not fritter it away superficially. Our service may be different one from another, and hopefully we can avoid prejudicial attitudes about what is a more important or less important type of service to render. The contribution of each is to be appreciated on its own merits, and it's the spirit in which that service is offered that is of such great importance. Once I heard Mr. Nakshivani tell a story. He was explaining about life in the World Center, and I heard him speak in Boston. And he was saying it's as if you have these chairs that are on a movie set, you know, the ones that are canvas and they have the name in the back. It says director or makeup or something like that. He said, we all have our names on the back of our chairs. Some of them say teaching center member, or some of them say gardener, or some of them say workshop, some of them say something. It doesn't matter. It's the spirit with which we serve that counts. It's all of us together that make the World Center work. The growing we do while here is often intense, and it serves as a foundation for future chapters of service, like one of the many stepping stones across the broad river of life. And when we leave the World Center, we're hopefully prepared to go out and do something, to engage in a lifetime of service, decade after decade after decade. As Abdu'l-Baha said, know thou that nothing will benefit thee in this life, save supplication and invocation unto God, service in his vineyard, and with a heart full of love be in constant servitude to him. In all aspects of our lives, at home, at school, in our professions, at our workplace, during our leisure time and activities, at all times, we need to strive and set an example as members of a community that aspires to freedom from prejudice. In closing, as we have mentioned, the world is in need of a living example of the oneness and wholeness of the human race. People need to cling to something. We verily, declares Baha'u'llah, have come to unite and weld together all that dwell on earth. Ours is the assignment to provide that example, gradually freeing ourselves from our prejudices, sweeping them aside, wiping them out, paving the way for humanity to be at peace. It can be done on a daily basis as we, among others, participate in our core activities or build up our communities and clusters, provide a careful education for our children, pioneer, travel teach, and in our own case, serve the House of Justice here at the World Center. In a nutshell, we need to keep service to the faith in the forefront of our lives, at the top of our priority list. Seize thy chance, for it will come to thee no more. This is not a cause, says the beloved guardian, which may be made a plaything for your idle fancies, nor is it a field for the foolish and faint of heart. By God, this is the arena of insight and detachment, of vision and upliftment, where none may spur on their chargers save the valiant horsemen of the merciful, who have severed all attachment to the world of being. Let us spur on our chargers and set a new standard of human behavior. Happy, strong, courageous, and confident in the future of a united humanity. After all, the building process to which we are consecrated is, and I quote, the one hope of a stricken society. We're not going to solve all the problems, but we can do our best to play our part. None of us should underestimate the mission with which we have been entrusted. We have only one life on this earthly plane to offer in service. let us give our best to the universal house of justice and to the blessed beauty. Thank you.